In the Second Age of Ambivalence, the Terra was visited by a race whose true name is unknown, but they are generally referred to in antiquity as the Heralds. Having done what they came to do, the Heralds returned to their own realm, leaving behind an array of stone structures, referred to in antiquity as the Sentinels. For 2,000 years, the Sentinels kept their lonely watch over the land. Then, as the Third Age of Ambivalence approached, they were discovered by an incoming tribe called the Interlopers. The Interlopers immediately identified the Sentinels as holy, and proclaimed the site a place of worship. Over the next 20 years they worshipped there, with elaborate rites that would go on for days, culminating in mass sacrifices. For weeks afterward, the stone Sentinels were painted red with the blood of those slaughtered there. The Interlopers' way of life came to an abrupt end in the 5th year of the Third Age of Ambivalence. The land was subjugated by an advanced tribe called the Enders of Ruin. The Interlopers were swiftly overwhelmed and destroyed, with the few survivors taken into slavery. When the Enders of Ruin discovered the Sentinels, they regarded the strange stones as cursed, and forbid all access to the site, on pain of death. For over 500 years, the Sentinels remained mostly undisturbed. As the Enders of Ruin's control over the area began to lapse, small but persistent cults discovered the site, and grew steadily bolder in their activities, believing the power of the Sentinels would protect them from retribution. Eventually, the Enders of Ruin were defeated by the armies of the warlord Heimdall, and the remaining pockets of their civilization fled the land forever. Thus ended the Third Age of Ambivalence, and began the First Age of Omnipresence. Heimdall and his successors had no interest in the Sentinels, and their forces quickly moved on. For the next 200 years, the site was visited by different cultic movements. Their practices grew increasingly violent and intolerant of other belief systems. A protracted conflict broke out between the two most powerful groups. These were the adherents of the doom of Adeline, who believed a cataclysm was imminent and that the Sentinels would signal its coming. Their great rivals were the Sleepers, who believed the Sentinels were themselves sleeping gods, who would eventually awaken to establish dominion over the Terra. For generations, these two cults vied for control of the site where the Sentinels stood, unmoved by the barbaric events that surrounded them. There were assassinations, sacrifices, and outbreaks of violence, but neither group could claim to be dominant over the other. In the end, it took an unprecedented act of treachery to bring the dispute to a definitive close. In the 264th year of the Age of Omnipresence, the adherents of the Doom of Adeline abandoned the area. The Sleepers quickly seized control of the contested site, and were able to worship the Sentinels, unmolested by competitors. This situation continued for 2 years, but during this time, the adherents of the Doom of Adeline had gathered strength and amassed powerful followers. They returned in great number one moonlit night and ambushed the Sleepers. Under the ageless gaze of the Sentinels, a brutal massacre was carried out. Most of the Sleepers were killed in the initial fighting. The rest were bound with rope to the Sentinels and mutilated. Their organs were cut out and burned in front of them. Their hearts were punctured and used to paint the rocks with blood. The dismembered limbs of the dead were mounted on spikes and left to rot in the sun. The Sleepers were wiped out entirely, their creed and culture erased from existence. Having won their victory, the adherents of the Doom of Adeline became the dominant group at the site of the Sentinels. However, as they continued to grow in number, divisions began to occur. Smaller sects broke off, diverging from the practices of the core organization. By the year 300 of the Age of Omnipresence, the adherents had split into two rival factions, the true adherents and the disciples of Omnipresence. What had begun as a war of words quickly escalated into violence, with atrocities committed on both sides. In the end, it was the random cruelty of nature that intervened. A new plague broke out among the true adherents, decimating the population. In their weakened state, they were no match for a surprise assault by the disciples of Omnipresence. Those who fought back were slaughtered where they stood. The survivors were rounded up and burned alive, their ashes scattered at the feet of the Sentinels. The triumph of the disciples of Omnipresence was short-lived, for they too succumbed to the plague that had stricken their enemies. Believing this to be a punishment from the gods, they fled the area, never to return. Such was the savage past of the Sentinels that few would dare go near them after their abandonment. The first age of Omnipresence limped on until it came to a sudden end with the invasion of the Terror by the Wanderers of Omega, a race from beyond the heavens. Since they had no interest in the Sentinels, the site was left alone. Strange prophecies and myths continue to circulate about the true nature and purpose of the Sentinels, which remains inconclusive. Thus ends this history.